Alright, I just read this, but I accidentally deleted the video. So I'm going to do it again. But I'm not as pissed as last time this happened. Because this time it was my fault. I mistakenly deleted the video before it was done uploading. So it's on me. So, no bad feelings towards anybody. But I'm going to have to read it again. And that's always fun. It is true as he says, remarked Spear, and it was noticeable that all three conspirators, Dave Brutus, Trent Cassius, and Robinson Casca, addressed their remarks to Mr. Gaird's daughter rather than to her husband. Our commune will be a very tentative movement, and with many facets. I wish... Here he gave another of his weary sighs, and his blue eyes took on that hopeless film of disillusionment which had had such a curious pathos of its own. I wish her father wasn't quite so absorbed in his religious ideas. He would be such a power, if only... Cordelia pulled down her muddy skirt hem over her ungainly ankles, and let her eyes embrace all the four men in one sweeping and rather contemptuous glance. Why don't you ever make him dismiss that man, John Crow? She threw out harshly. It's that idiot who urges him on. Father's just putty in his hands, and he doesn't believe in anything himself. He plays with us all. I know him, through and through. The founders of the Glastonbury Commune surveyed their hostess, much as a board of directors might have surveyed their office stenographer if she had suddenly told them that their window cleaner was the real danger to the firm. And last time I laughed at that. It was pretty funny. I didn't give it such a good reading this time. But hey, those are the breaks in life, huh? But Mr. Evans, who had returned quietly to his antique chair and after his discovery that the lawyer from the Sillies read The Authors, broke in at this point. My wife has got fond of John, he said gravely, and so she always punishes him and holds him up to scorn. Owen! Cordelia's astonishment at this unexpected attack was so great that her big mouth became as round as the letter O in the ora pro nobis of a missal. "'Tis Miss Crummy, not Miss Cordy, what's got fond of Crow's cousin," interjected Red. "She's as divided as art between Crow's cousin and young Mr. Decker. Ain't I right, Mrs. Heavens? 'Tis her, and not you, would have got soft on Crow's cousin." The insanity of Red's obsession against Philip was so extreme that it extended itself to every member of Philip's family. To Red's mind, Miss Crow of Benedict Street, as well as Mr. and Mrs. Crow of Northlode Street, and even Persephone Spear, at present domiciled at Dickory Cantles, had no individuality of their own. They were the Bugler's cousins, and that, in fact, damned them. "What's your opinion, Evans?" said Dave Spears, anxious to turn the conversation away from these dangerous personalities, "as to what form our commune should take if we really do go it started in January?" "'Twas your hown, missus, weren't it?" interrupted the incorrigible Cockney, addressing Dave. "What first thought of upsetting the bugler by this here commune?" Did I say missus there? "Was your own missus, weren't it?" He's referring to Penelope. Persephone. I like how when I try to clarify things, it only makes it more confusing. Mr. Evans rubbed the side of his great hooked nose and with his left thumb. Everybody in the room except Red, who now, as he reverted to his pipe, found his thoughts leaving the Crow family and summoning up the more soothing image of Sally Jones, fixed their eyes upon the Welshman. The little parlor had become as stuffy as it was chilly. The gusty wind, beginning to shake the not very solid architecture of 5 Old Wells Road, seemed to join with the bizarre furniture in that small room in calling upon Merlin's biographer to utter some oracular word. At any rate, there occurred just then that kind of pregnant silence to which groups of human beings are liable when their private thoughts differ so completely as to evoke a sort of negative Ooh, equilibrium. Speaking of negative equilibrium. I think it won't matter very much, Mr. Evans said gravely, what form your commune takes. You yourself, and he stared at Dave with a mouth from which a small dribble of saliva was descending, you yourself will oppose our good friend here, and he nodded at Paul Trent, and that opposition will bring the whole thing to nothing. His words were the first words, all this long while, that brought Paul Trent, who had been half concealed in the smoke of Red's pipe, down from his seat on the arm of the chair. The feminine-complexioned, soft-fleshed anarchist, in his beautifully fitting clothes, now moved to the fireplace, where he stood upon the rug and contemplated Mr. Evans with a tender indulgence. And here last time I mentioned that, last time I did this, because I have to do it over again, I mentioned that character, Paul Trent, when I imagine him looking like the Page guy in 30 Rock, that show. You know, Mr. Sunshine. The woman and the other men, for even Red seemed conscious of something unusual in the air, watched these two Celts with a faint uneasiness. For it seemed as if these strangely different aboriginals of the Western Isles stared at one another, as though something was passing between them totally obscure to the other persons in the room. "I've only read," murmured Paul Trent, in a much softer voice than that in which he discoursed on the commune, books upon the authors. Then, without a moment's pause, as if it were a fragment of some immemorial ritual, of which they both held the mystic clue, Paul Trent began to recite, in a sort of grave sing-song, words that seemed to Cordelia to be madness, to Dave to be deviltry, and to Red to be pure gibberish. Complete was the captivity of Gwarin Cassidy, lured thither through the emissary of Pywel and Pedery. Before him no one entered into it, into the heavy dark chain that held. It reminds me of the dwarf song in Lord of the Hobbit. We must await the break of day to find the... Here Paul Trent stops, but only to give place to Mr. Evans, who caught up the refrain, answering him with a sort of antiphony that seemed to their hearers still worse insanity. They had a Vanwin's cauldron, what is it like? A rim of pearls it had around the edge. It boils not the food of a coward or perjurer. The bright sword of Lilwith was lifted to it, and in the hand of Linwalk it was left, and before the door of Hell's Gate lamps were burning. 7 alone did we return from the fortress of the perfect ones. Just making that up. See, even the second time around, I couldn't get a better jingle to it. Did you compose all that, Owen? Inquired Cordelia. Certainly not, answered Paul Trent, speaking for Mr. Evans. It's all in the books about the authors. Neither of us invented it, Rise, Loomis. They all quote it. It's from a very ancient Welsh poem called The Harrying of Anwath, and it appears to refer... But Mr. Evans interrupted him. It obviously does refer, he shouted, to the ancient heathen grail, far older than Christianity, which redeemed, and always will redeem, everyone who understands it from the captivity of Gwere and Care City. He suddenly burst into a spasm of suppressed laughter, which had an extremely disconcerting effect upon the ears of his hearers. And last time I mentioned I couldn't believe that she married this crazy guy. Mr. Evans was evidently on the edge of a shameless and vociferous laughing fit caused by some interior vision, which struck his mind as a monstrous Rabelaisian jest. It always has an unpleasant effect when a person of a very dominant physical personality falls into an uncontrollable laughter. There is something indecent in the spectacle of it. This indecency seems to be mysteriously increased when there is an ignorance in the hearers, as in this case there certainly was, profound ignorance, as to the cause of the explosion. Swinging his head and his shoulders backward and forward, making the most extraordinary chucklings, growing at the same time very red in the face, he allowed these laughter tears to run down his cheeks and to fall upon his waistcoat without attempting the least concealment of his emotion. It was as if he had suddenly been permitted by a special dispensation of Providence to catch a glimpse of the monstrous cosmic joke, abominable, heroic, megalomaniacal, into which the whole creation revolved itself. Cordelia rose from her seat and, moving to his side, laid her hand on his shoulder. She felt as if her strange mate had suddenly turned into a medium of some huge, earth-crackling supernatural ribaldry that to her was inscrutable. She looked anxiously at the others to see how this exhibition struck them. But under her touch, Mr. Evans quickly recovered himself, and what had so agitated her womanly nerves seemed quite a natural occurrence to the other men. Their host's laughing fits evidently partook of that extra mundane humor to which all men are subject and which remains a mystery of childishness to their wives and daughters. Cordelia, surveying the diminishing convulsions of her partner's gaunt frame with an irritable concern, became a symbol of immemorial feminine annoyance in the presence of such a masculine outburst, when to a man, quite suddenly, the whole cosmos appears in the light a monstrous joke. Women never laugh in that sort of way. Their laughter is pure naughtiness and unadulterated mischief, or it springs from physical well-being and in the airy happiness of the innocent earth bubbles of matter, or finally, it is hysterical, as when Cordelia laughed like the neighing of a horse. Last time I mentioned, I don't remember that, Cordelia laughing like the neighing of a horse. And also I enjoyed the generalities he's giving here. But she went quietly back to her seat now, and Mr. Evans remarked gravely, "In this affair of yours, gentlemen, I confess I'm no politician. What I was going to say was, when a person touches," he rolled his eyes towards Mr. Murray's nephew, "this basic secret of life, that our bards, capital B, expressed in poems like the Harrying of Anwen, those external arrangements of society, capital S, capitalism or communism, seem unimportant." Dave Spear rose in his feet, stretched himself, sighed heavily, squared his shoulders, and with his hands clasped behind his back, broke into a low, intense appeal addressed to Mr. Evans alone. "If you could see human beings digging as I have lately, up there at Wookiee, straining their muscles and going on, and if you could realize that this same manual labor is required all the while to keep the machinery of our industrial system working, and that the people who do it, upon these labors we all live, the people who make the machines and who feed the machines," and here I made an inside joke to the machine people, and I'm going to do that right now again, "are robbed by us, non-workers, of all but their bare living, you would not, my dear Mr. Evans, you could not, talk of communism as unimportant. You and I, with our bourgeoisie mentality, shrink from it as we shrink from slavery. But surely it's more righteous than we should all quite openly be slaves of the state, than that by an evil and crafty trick, and by our hypocritical talk of mental labor being harder than manual labor, we should prolong this crime, this unpardonable sin." At the words "unpardonable sin," Mr. Evans, who had been hearing him gravely, gave a guilty start, and automatically looked sideways to the floor, to the place where, if he'd been in the shop, the staircase to the cellar would have been. "You can't have either communism or anarchism in our little town," he said. "It's the whole country that must go for it, or it must be left alone. And even if you were dictator of all England, Spear, I tell you it isn't money or position in life that makes the difference between happiness and unhappiness. It's something else. And when I think of how unimportant all these questions are in comparison with... I could... And we're going to stop again. Again for me, first time for you. At what he could do. Scream or sing or laugh hysterically, we'll find out next time. So until next time, I don't have my drink this time, because I drank it in the first draft of this. So, until next time, see you in Glastonbury. Sorry for the confusion. Nobody who's paying attention. Bye.